On August 11th, 2020, Microsoft launched the xCloud streaming beta for Android mobile users who have Game Pass Ultimate. For those who don't have Game Pass Ultimate or an Android phone, I wanted to give some early impressions from this beta. One very important thing to keep in mind. Everything is subject to your internet connection, including location, the structure of your house, and your mobile phone provider. This video is simply to give you an idea of the service and its potential ups and downs that you might be able to predict based on what you're currently working with, right? This is not meant to be a final say, especially since this is still a beta and a lot can change before the official launch in September. A couple of notes to be aware of. I'm using a Samsung Galaxy S10e with Verizon Wireless Unlimited 4G data plan. I do test xCloud on data. My home Wi-Fi network is equipped with 5G and 2.4G Wi-Fi, and I test xCloud with both. I also chose 3 games to test: Forza Horizon 4, Halo 5 Guardians, and Streets of Rage 4. I felt like these would be a good variety of games that I'm personally familiar with in order to feel any differences in potential input delay, as well as testing games with different intensities of motion. Again, your mileage may vary with different games. I also test these games in different parts of my house. I have an upstairs and a downstairs, and downstairs is significantly further from my router, while upstairs I tested right next to the router. I also tested within natural conditions, so whatever my wife was watching on Netflix or YouTube or on a Zoom call, that didn't keep me from testing out xCloud while those things were happening, unless it became unbearable for her or for myself. Also, last thing, battery life, fantastic. In about an hour of play, I only lost about 20% of my battery life. So the battery life with xCloud running in the background is pretty dang good. Granted, my Samsung S10e is a fairly brand new phone. Again, mileage may vary for you. All right, let's get into this. So when this beta came out, the first game that immediately came to my mind to test was Forza Horizon 4. Among the 30 plus games that are available to play during this beta, Forza is the game with the fastest movement, so I wanted to know how well xCloud could keep up. And it held up surprisingly well, but between all the games, Forza did have the most problems. A lot of frequent stuttering in the audio, some freezing in the graphics, and a general blurriness from xCloud trying to keep up. The input delay was noticeable because my ability to turn was hampered and braking engaged later than it should have to help me get through the turns better. Like, I frequently ran into cars. The game is playing as normal, but because of the slight input delay and the way AI drivers act in Forza, I just kept running into them. But as you can see, I'm able to drive, and you kind of get used to it after a while. But even if I were downstairs in my home, I wouldn't necessarily choose to play under this particular input delay. If I'm gonna play Forza, I'm gonna play on the Xbox, not on xCloud. The positive is that between 5G and 2.4G, there's no discernible increase of input delay, but there is a noticeable difference in graphical fidelity, which is to be expected, but it's not unplayable at 2.4G. But obviously, if you have the option to go with something better, do that. The hardest part to deal with is being able to see, because the screen can become fairly pixelated, so I was running into traffic and I couldn't see until it was way too late, fairly often. And that was with 5G as well at times. With that said, there were times where 2.4G looked very, very smooth graphically, like on par with 5G. I'm not sure if that was because of the graphics presented at the time or the internet was just fantastic in the moment, but it was generally impressive. So if you're stuck with 2.4G, there might be hope for you after all, which is a wonderful thing to be able to say considering this is a streaming service. Playing over data, though, was an absolute nightmare. It was mostly unplayable. The connection was entirely unstable. Mind you, I'm in an area where I have zero issues with my 4G data doing literally anything else. Pixelation was atrocious, but the worst part was the constant freezing and rubber banding. It was like watching a video catch up, except you're trying to control a car. So when it worked, for the moments it did work, it seemed like the input delay was no worse, but because the connection was so shoddy, I couldn't turn accurately. Originally, I was going to try to race on 4G, but it wasn't going to work. It was just too bad. Up next was Halo 5 Guardians. I wanted to test this game because it's a first-person shooter, and it's one I'm very, very familiar with. So I understand the feel I expect to get out of this game, and I wanted to see if any kind of first-person shooter would be playable. And I believe the answer to that is yes. But I don't think you'll be able to play online multiplayer with any similar success. On 5G, next to my router and downstairs, Halo 5 looked incredibly good. You could see many of the same details during cutscenes, and everything was discernible during gameplay. There was very little pixelation except maybe during bright flashes. I mean, there was always some level of slight pixelation and a little screen tearing, but overall, it played smooth. Input delay was about the same amount as Forza, but felt worse when aiming. My turning wasn't snapping the way I like it to snap when typically playing Halo. I could feel the trigger pulls feeling a tad late, but the aiming felt harder to do because the enemies were moving at the normal pace they were, but I was being delayed and able to shoot them. And it felt okay for playing campaign, but it would be an absolute intolerable experience playing multiplayer with even less delay. So that wasn't even worth trying. Downstairs 5G was mostly the same. The game started once my wife loaded up a YouTube video, but that was literally no more than a second and a half. After that, it was smooth the entire time. 2.4G was also impressive, and this gave me hope that 2.4G users will be able to enjoy a pretty freaking good experience with whatever game they're playing. The graphical fidelity, or the visual fidelity, was downgraded, but gameplay was clear. There was no noticeable increase in input delay, and there was no more stuttering or pixelation than 5G. And mind you, I also have 3 security cameras on the 2.4G network as well, and it worked smooth regardless. This was the same with Forza, and also the same for Streets of Rage 4. Now, data was a similar story to Forza. You can see things, but the connection was also unstable, which led to a ton of screen tearing, rubber banding, and pixelation. My connection was lost a few times as well, but once I got out the cutscenes and was given control to play, it was unplayable. The screen pixelated so much I couldn't see anything, and even if I could a little bit, aiming was impossible. The last game I tested is Streets of Rage 4. I chose this game because it has fighting game-like timing with inputs, and again, I'm very familiar with it, so I could comfortably feel the difference. And I have great news. This game rocked it. On 5G upstairs and downstairs, the game was butter. The game looked good, 0 pixelation, a little bit of screen tearing, but otherwise, this was easily the most playable game I tested. Barely any input delay. I could tell there was a tiny bit more than what I'm used to because I couldn't nail as many recoveries after getting hit as I liked, but I also know some of those hits and lack of recoveries were on me. And that was actually a great feeling to have considering I was playing over xCloud. Yeah, it wasn't perfect, but it was as close to the normal experience of all the games. I imagine it's because there's just not as much for the connection to maintain, so it performed better generally. But regardless of the reason, it worked well. 2.4G also worked beautifully. It was very much comparable to 5G. I do think there was a smidge more input delay, but nothing worth getting upset over. Playing Streets of Rage 4 on 2.4G was darn near as close to playing on console as it could. There was more stuttering than 5G, which is to be expected, but it was not terrible to play at all. And again, this is very good for 2.4G users out there. So then there's playing on 4G data, and as you'd expect, it was the worst experience. Graphical pixelation, rubber banding, and screen tearing were all very present. Also, a couple of disconnections as well. I did get through the level, which was far more than I could say for Forza and Halo, but if I wanted to play Streets of Rage on the go, nah, this isn't worth the effort. This is not it. But this is a good time to note that despite the terrible nature of playing on 4G data, the game was not continuing to perform while I was having connection issues. So if the connection was bad, the whole game was bad. If the game froze, everything froze. And so if you're in a situation where you do have a great data connection or Wi-Fi connection, whatever the case may be, and the game suddenly starts acting up, it's not like you're going to get the tar be out of you while your connection stabilizes. Or say you're playing Forza. It's not like you're going to continue to drive while the connection stabilizes. No, everything stops. So that's kind of the saving grace when having these connection issues. Now, I actually did a bonus test with Bleeding Edge, which is an always online brawler, just to check it out because I did want to test something with an online component. Now, I only tested 5G with this, but I have to say it was also a fantastic experience. I could literally play a few matches of Bleeding Edge online and be okay. And so that makes me wonder how well fighting games like Killer Instinct would work, because the button delay was not that apparent when I was playing Bleeding Edge, which I'm kind of shocked because I'm playing an always online game, which, you know, that's going to have its own input delays already over xCloud, which also has its own input delays as well. So it actually felt like with Streets of Rage 4 and Bleeding Edge, the input delays were less than Halo and Forza, which is great if you're a person who's into fighting games. Like, I don't want to sound dismissive of the idea like, oh yeah, I could play a fighting game over xCloud. Yeah, right. No, that's certainly a concern, but it's less of a concern now that I've tried out Bleeding Edge and Streets of Rage, one not playing online, one always online. Now, I don't think you would ever obviously do like heavy competition over xCloud, but if you were at a friendly or if you were at somebody's house and you wanted to play, it seemed like it was a viable experience. I think there's hope for fighting games working over xCloud. For the service in general, I think where xCloud is going to find its legs is being able to work over data. And I hope for a majority of you, it can work over data, because if I'm in my house, unless I'm on the toilet for 45 minutes, like, I don't plan on using xCloud unless there's some co-op game with no local co-op available. Otherwise, I want to use it while I'm waiting at the DMV or waiting for some unimportant meeting, or I'm at my friend's house where Wi-Fi may not cut it, right? Or I'm at the airport. And thankfully, because the 2.4G works so well, at least in my test, you could probably get away with playing it at hotels. That's great. So if Microsoft can get those areas down, xCloud is going to be hard to pass up. But for now, data is a sticking point. Playing over 4G is a sticking point. Otherwise, playing over Wi-Fi is a pretty dang good experience. Now, I will say I didn't have a means to test over heavier traffic. So, you know, playing in a hotel or playing in an airport or a place where a lot of people are using the same Wi-Fi, a Starbucks, for example. So again, as with everything else, your mileage may vary, but so far, xCloud is shaping up to be very good. So I'd love to hear your experience with xCloud so far, if you've been able to use it. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please tap that thumbs up button. I also cover various gaming news topics in the video games industry, so if you're interested, feel free to subscribe as well. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.